Sabah al-Khair, good morning dear listeners. You're listening to Radio 3CR on 855 AM and Palestine Remembered with Robert Martin, Nasser Mashni and Yusuf Ahmed al-Rimawi.
Palestine Remembered is Australia's only English language radio program that is totally dedicated to Palestine. We'd like to welcome those listening on 855 and those that will join us on podcast at 3cr.org.au.
Thanks for joining us. Stay with us and enjoy the episode.
Good morning, Rob. How you doing?
Mate, I'm very well, Nasser, and good morning, Kim.
Good morning to both of you. How are you?
And we're very excited to have you on. For our listeners today, that Kim is an Aboriginal lady from Melbourne and is doing a PhD in Palestine. And so today we're blessed to have you on with the amount of information that you can give us.
Thanks, Rob. Just one clarification. I'm actually originally from Queensland, so I'm a Murray. I'm not actually from Melbourne, but been down here quite a while now.
Well, we've adopted
Thanks
you,
for the
Kim.
correction.
Yeah, no problem.
Kim, can you tell us on your journey to Palestine? How did you, as an Indigenous woman, find Palestine?
I became politically active in the sort of mid-90s around Aboriginal issues, particularly, when John Howard was elected and around the struggle at that time because of the concerted pushback by Howard and the Liberal government on Aboriginal rights and issues. So that's when I first started, becoming active in a real sense, participating in protests and activities and lots of things like that. And through the course of that, I became much more aware of the Palestine situation. I had already, had a fairly reasonable knowledge that it was going on, but I hadn't been, politically active or drawn to it. It became quite clear to me as I became more politically active around Indigenous issues and Aboriginal issues that obviously that, Australia is not the only settler colonial state or country in the world. So it's really important, obviously, to build solidarity and to see the links between Indigenous struggles throughout the world. And obviously, Palestine is one of those places as well that is also a settler colonial country. And so for me, I started to educate myself more on it and to understand the situation. And particularly then when the Second Intifada broke out, I felt very strongly about what was happening. So I became, I was working with an Indigenous student rights group, and we started to do some Palestine solidarity work with local Palestinian youth groups in Sydney and Canberra. So that sort of started to extend my knowledge. And then I can't remember what year it was, maybe early 2000s anyway, a friend of mine who had been very active in the South African anti-apartheid struggle was contacted by a South African anti-apartheid activist who was working in Palestine with a group called the International Women's Peace Service. And they were looking for Aboriginal Indigenous women and Indigenous women around the world and working class women to join the project in Palestine. So
what a wonderful project.
Yes, it is. It is a wonderful project. It's still there, and I really encourage people to have a look at it and find out more about it. You can check them out. So it's the International Women's Peace Service. And they originally started during the Second Intifada because they wanted to be able to help local communities in Palestine, and they work very closely with the local communities on the ground in the occupied West Bank. I was told about this opportunity and asked if I would be interested in going, and so I had to think about it for a couple of days, and then because I hadn't really ever considered going to Palestine before this. And,
not on the list, is it normally?
Yeah, it was. There was a lot of things I wanted to do, but yeah, it wasn't the first thing that had come to my mind.
No.
And so after thinking about it for a couple of days, I decided yes, I would do it because I just happened to actually be in between changing jobs. I'd been working and a contract had finished. I hadn't started a new contract, so I thought, oh well, okay, let's. I'd been thinking to go to Latin America or somewhere else. So I thought, well, okay, let's go to Palestine and, do some active solidarity on the ground. So 5 weeks after I decided that I was going, I was in Palestine. So
Well done.
It happened very quickly. Yeah. So it was very quickly. And so I was there for about the first time, I was there for about 4 months. And so it was a real, even though I felt like I had a fairly good understanding of the situation and the occupation before going in there, because, as I said, I tried to educate myself over the previous years about the situation there. It's still a shock to see it in real life.
I experienced the same thing. I was pretty familiar with it and went over there, and nothing can prepare you for when you actually see it.
Exactly, that's right. I say to people usually, I say, I don't want to sound like I'm being cheesy or not, but it was a profound experience, really becomes indelible. It becomes an indelible experience. Yeah. And
what year was that first visit, Kim?
That was in 2004, the first time I went.
Yep.
And I was there for about 3 or 4 months working with IWPS. And it was like I said, you know the basics of it, but you go and you just see I don't want to minimize the brutality of the occupation, but also the ridiculousness of the occupation, And I'd ask my colleagues, I was working actually, 2 of the key women on my team were actually Jewish American women who had been involved in Palestine Solidarity for a long time. And one of them had actually been working in the occupied West Bank for about a year before I got there. And, and I'd say to them, why is the Israeli military doing this? Or why are they doing this? And their response would be, because they can.
Yeah.
And it was like, really? That's the answer? And I realized later on that is exactly the answer.
Yeah, they want to and they can, and no one can hold them to account. So.
Exactly. And so even though, obviously we know that there's lots of political and ideological reasons behind all of this sort of stuff, but on the practice, when you see it on the ground, it's very much like this. It's an attempt at attrition, to push Palestinians out through attrition, through just as one of my other colleagues coined it, the everyday sorrow of occupation. Wow. Which I thought was a very good way to describe it.
It is, yeah.
And so 2004, and then when was the next time you went?
So then I when I came back, I continued to work with IWPS as a sort of, basically the whole group is, we don't have an office or anything other than in the occupied territories. We, where we live when we're there, everything else is organised, basically through the internet and online and things like that. So I continued to work with the group, but then I went back again in 2007, and I stayed for a year this time. So I spent half my time in working with IWPS, and the other half I was working with a Palestinian NGO in Ramallah. So I did that, and so that was again, a very profound experience, because you get to see. It's very different living in Ramallah compared to living in a small village in the middle of the West Bank. And the village that we were living in the West Bank is not far from Ariel colony, the colony of Ariel, which is probably the biggest colony in the West Bank. So working there, and we just didn't stay in that area is known as Salfit. We travelled all across the occupied West Bank. So having that experience working on the ground and then also working in Ramallah was quite different in many ways. So I did that, and then for the next few years after that, I went back every year or two for a couple of months whenever time permitted. But I think it's probably been, unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to go back now for maybe 5 years or so. But obviously, I still follow things fairly closely, and I'm very interested in it. So for me, I suppose what it comes down to is, the similarities between the Aboriginal and Indigenous struggle here in Australia and the struggle in Palestine. Both of us. There is a settler, both Israel and Australia, settler colonial countries. Both our people have been violently dispossessed. There's been ethnic cleansing of both of our people, mass murder, all of these things that go on. So there is so many similarities, at least in my mind, between the Aboriginal struggle in Australia and the struggle in Palestine. So to me, it's very important to to build those links between our communities and to see that our struggle really is a struggle that is one that we carry out together, I suppose is the best way to put it.
So we should tell our listeners that if they've want some more information on the International Women's Peace Service, the website is iwps.info. iwps.info. They can find out some more there. Now, it's interesting that you say that, Kim, because as we know, the Zionists have been very, very keen to switch that narrative that in fact they're indigenous, that Benjamin Netanyahu is indigenous to Palestine, and the Zionist network here in Australia has been very, very proactive in endeavouring to co-opt the Aboriginal community and have had some success.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yes, that's very true. I mean, you have here in Australia, I mean, we have the same thing, you know, we have people like Pauline Hanson who claims she's Indigenous, you know. It's the same right-wing, horrible right-wing narrative that is underpinned by racism, that's underpinned by a complete disregard for the Indigenous experience, whether it be in Palestine or in Australia. And I think it is really important that, you know, that we do try to make those links between both the struggles, and that we try to build links between our communities in Australia, and obviously Indigenous communities and the Palestinian community around the world. And yes, I think there has been a certain degree of success by the Zionist movement here in Australia. But, you know, I also know many Aboriginal activists who are very, very committed to the Palestinian struggle and see it as something that they need to be standing in solidarity with.
There's a few Uncle Toms at the top that have sold out.
Well, yeah, I mean, it can be definitely things that happen like that, and I think the main thing for us is to actually look at where we can build links and educate our community on this sort of thing, and why, you know, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders should be standing in solidarity with Palestinians. And so that is I think that within our communities, I think that we have to focus on, because, you know, often when there's people who have an opposite position, you know, try to change their mind is never going to work.
Yeah.
So to me, the issue is like, how do we reach out and talk to those in our community who may not really know all the details, may only have a limited understanding of what's going on. As I said, you know, originally I had a very limited understanding of the Palestinian struggle, and it was only through, you know, making a conscious effort to understand it further that, you know, that I'm where I am now, sort of thing. Yeah.
So you're just completing your PhD?
That's correct, yes.
What did you learn?
Oh, I learned a lot. So yeah, just to give an idea of, to explain what my PhD is, it is on Palestine. So basically I'm looking at settler colonialism and political violence in Palestine during the period between 1917 and 1939. So the idea was to look at often a lot of studies, academic studies or books, whatever you would like to think of, have usually they focus on one side or the other. They either focus on Palestine or Palestinians, or they focus on Zionists. So my thesis is more to try to do a comparative study of it as violence was escalating through that period. And so for me, it was born out of this PhD was born out of my time in Palestine, because I can't remember which year, it might have been 2007, I can't remember what year it was. I was there, and at the time there was, you know, as you both would know, settler violence escalates and de-escalates at different times, and there'll be patches where settler violence still happens, but and military violence still happens, but then there'll be periods where it escalates much higher to that. And I was there at one part when there was a concerted campaign by the Zionist right wing living in the settlements to attack Palestinian villages. And there was lots of,
right, yeah.
yeah, there was a lot of crops being burnt. There were, regular invasions of by settlers. And of course, the Israeli military would just stand by and let them do whatever they wanted. There was even, at one stage, there was one particular attack where even Netanyahu, I think it was Netanyahu, even one of the leaders of Israel, described it as a pogrom. But then, of course, they actually then pulled back from saying that. So that's where. Sorry, what was that, Robert?
And do nothing about it.
And do nothing about it, yeah. So that was the basis of what inspired me to, start looking at this. So I wanted to look at historically, where did, because it's often painted, settler violence and things like that. It's just when there are those extreme cases, not extreme cases, but those more obvious cases of settler violence, they're just an aberration. It's not really what's happened. So I wanted to look at where did this emerge from? Was this correct? Was this the important thing? So I sort of went right back to the start. And so what's been interesting for me about this study has been, it's given me a better understanding of both sides, both the Palestinian side and the Zionist side. On the Zionist side, I now have a better understanding of where a lot of the arguments that, hardcore Zionists will put forward to justify occupation and apartheid and things like that. And to be honest, the arguments that we're hearing today are the same arguments that were being made 120 years ago.
We were having this conversation before, weren't we, with NASA, saying how you had the same conversations every 10 years or every 5 years.
Yes.
And obviously it's been happening over there, and correct.
That's right, yeah. And so, when I was doing my research and I was reading, what speeches and things that Ben Gurion would have given to, leaderships of the yeshiv, the Zionist yeshiv, and other speeches by people like Chaim Weizmann and things like that, and also Jabotinsky. So, you read these and you go, right, so this is the origin of this mythology that has been developed in relation to that. And the other thing that's very noticeable from obviously the Zionist side too as well is that, there is a realization by the Zionist leaders, particularly people like Ben Gurion and others, that they know that this is a conflict over land, that they know that this is not about, as often is argued, that it's a conflict of religion, it's a conflict of just so complex that you can't understand it. No, they understand fundamentally that this is a settler colonial conflict about land, about who is going to get control of this land, and there's a very important. There's an exchange at one part between Chaim Weizmann and Chaim Azaroff, who was assassinated in the mid. When was he assassinated? Early 30s, I think it was. Actually, not by Palestinians, but by a Jewish radical group. And Azaroff was the political sort of director officer of the Jewish agency in Palestine. And he writes this letter where he makes an assessment about what stage of the struggle they're up to. And he says, at the moment, we've built enough demographics that we're sort of at this stage that we've got more of a grip in Palestine, but it's not enough yet to block the Palestinian struggle. And we have to look at how do we do this. And of course, one of the key things for the Zionists was the demographic issue, which was, getting as much Zionist settlers to come in and settle and things like that. So you have that sort of issue that's happening. On the Palestinian side, what's interesting about it is obviously that clearly it is as with most settler colonial struggles, it is a reactive struggle. That you have a settler colonial power coming in that's and often you have the Zionists will tell you that this is not a settler colonial thing because the Zionist population that came and settled there were from all different places. They weren't from one metropole, and that's true. It is slightly different from most other settler colonial places, but it still has the basic mechanics of it, of what settler colonialism is, which is not the erasure, but the quest for control of territory, the ethnic cleansing or removal of the population, or in the words that Patrick Wolf would use, the elimination of the Indigenous population. And when he talks about elimination, what he means is it could be through massacres, genocide, it could be through assimilation. There's a whole variety of different ways. It doesn't just mean one thing. The Palestinian struggle in those early days was very much reactive, in the sense of hoping that Britain would, help and be understanding. But of course, Britain had its own ideas because it had an imperialist agenda. And it's only as, settler colonialism picks up and more Zionist population encroaches onto Palestinian land. You see this, Palestinians who've worked land for ages being pushed off land into shanty towns and things like that, that then you start to see this movement more towards a more combination of struggle that encompasses violence and non-violence. And most of the time between 1917 and 1939, the Palestinian struggle was non-violent. And even in the period of 1936 to 1939, which is the Great Revolt, it's the largest anti-colonial revolt at that time in history. At this time, it started off initially as a non-violent civil disobedience, as a strike, as people protesting, withholding taxes, doing all these things. And the reason it starts to escalate into guerrilla warfare predominantly is because of the way of the response of the British government, who actively try to repress the non-violent struggle by doing everything from, blowing up whole villages, dropping bombs from airplanes on villages, mass arrests, whole things like that. And this pushes it into a more violent thing. Very interesting for me about the 1936 revolt was the role played by the grassroots. At the time, if you read a lot of right-wing or even Zionist history books, they will always blame the Husseinis for what happened. Mm-hmm. But it was very much driven by on-the-ground grassroots, people organising through committees throughout Palestine, organising ordinary workers and ordinary peasants, and being part of that. And so to me, that was really impressive and very interesting to learn about.
Because, obviously the Zionist playbook is, Haj Husseini went to Germany, and according to Netanyahu, he told Hitler about the final solution. That's in fact the biggest challenge to the Palestinians not having a state today, is our intransience, never accepting that the Jews had a right to a state.
Yeah, and I mean, this is all, a distortion of actual history and what's going on. And the 36 to 39 revolt in particular is very interesting when you're looking at. There's been actually papers written on the similarities between the 36 and 39 revolt and the first Palestinian Intifada in '89, and looking at the role of, for example,
how organic they were.
Yes, the organics and the role of like the particular leaderships, whether it be the Husseini leadership or the Arafat leadership, things like that. That often this was very organic. It came from the base. It came from ordinary people, wanting to be free of the oppression and repression that they were facing. And so there was, there were everything from at the beginning of the 36 revolt, there were mass transport strikes, the shops all shuttered down in refusing to sell produce and goods and things like that. There were, the schools shut down. The women played a very important role in, making to collect funds for the community and distributing it and making sure that, people could feed their children and feed their families. It was a very impressive period. And when you had all of these committees, and like originally the first strike committee that was set up really was in Nablus. And then basically Nablus put out a call to say, we need to start organising. And within 2 or 3 days, there were hundreds of committees across Palestine that were joining this struggle.
What makes it even more impressive is the lack of media, social media, lack of technology. The fact that they could get these numbers without having the technology that we have today.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And it's what's interesting is like, and this is a period too where a lot of peasants in particular couldn't read or write.
Illiterate, yeah.
Yeah, they were illiterate. And so there was, there's these wonderful stories of how people would gather in town squares so that they could have the news from the newspapers, the Arab and Palestinian newspapers, about what was happening read out to them so they could keep up with that. And so you have this wonderful sense of community and that's there. And then, of course, as I said, you have this escalation after a while. Civil disobedience and non-violent direct action ceases, but because of the intensive repression of the British government on the Palestinian struggle, you do see a move into guerrilla warfare. But the mistake that people often make is to try and pit these things as if they're opposites to each other, and they're not opposites to each other. They were part and parcel of a joint struggle. And a guerrilla, in the sense of guerrilla warfare will not work unless it has the support of the masses.
The street,
It just doesn't work. And this is what was interesting. So you had this period in 36 up until, October, November, when a ceasefire finally starts, in the hope that the Husseini leadership actually negotiate this ceasefire. And then there's yet another Royal Commission by the British into why this has happened. And every Royal Commission that the British have into any of the disturbances in Palestine say the same thing, that it is because of Zionist settler colonialism. Every single one says it. Yep. And it doesn't change at all. But then in 37, mid-37, you have the resumption of the revolt. And at this time, in the second half of the revolt, it becomes a much more violent revolt, because in the sense of it's predominantly guerrilla warfare over civil disobedience. And that's primarily because Britain is able to successfully suppress the civil side of it. They successfully suppress the organising committees, any civil disobedience that has happened. And at this stage, Britain formed, they already had it, but they actively form military alliance with the Zionists. So thousands of Zionist settlers are recruited into working with the British to suppress the Palestinian uprising. This is actually of a great benefit to the Zionists, because even Ben Gurion talks about this. He talks about how that for them it was a boon, because one, it's semi-legalized. There were already Zionist underground militias that were operating illegally, like the Haganah and Irgun and things like that. And he says, well, this actually gave us a form of acceptance above ground. It also allowed Zionist troops to be openly trained with the British. And also he talks about they were also able to, they would often not hand back all the guns, they would keep a lot of the ammunition, things like that. So they built up their military reserves by this. But I mean, they were also manufacturing their own weaponry, and they're also smuggling in weaponry. Mm-hmm. So you can see there's this disparity there compared to the Palestinians, because the Palestinians were pretty much really just armed with
leftover World War I stuff,
Yeah, very old weaponry. I mean, they had, I always have trouble pronouncing his name, Fawaz Qais, who was a Syrian, fought against the French mandate, and that who came and at one part helped establish a more central command in the 36 period. Yeah. Even that was limited in what they can do. Yeah. And what's interesting, by the end of the 36-39 revolt, is you have a co-option of Palestinians as well in the year or so of the year to two of the revolt, where there's an establishment of what is known as the peace bands.
So stop there, Kim, so we can have something else for another show.
Okay, sure. Sorry.
We've actually run out.
That's good. No, tell me to stop when I'm going too far.
It's fantastic. Thank you so much, Kim. The best thing about this show is we're going to have a Kim Part 2 coming soon, so stay tuned.
Okay.
I'm sure you'll all agree it was great to have Kim joining us and sharing her learnings. June is Radiothon month. Make sure you support 3CR and independent radio. Share the podcast, tell your friends, and don't forget, Free Palestine.
Throughout the month of June, we'll be asking you, the listener, to support radical community-owned media during our June Station Appeal.
We'll be taking donations online to help keep the station going for another year.
Like so many community organisations, we're feeling the impact of COVID-19 restrictions, and we know you are too.
But independent community media is more important than ever, and we hope you can show your support with a donation.
The 3CR Station Appeal starts on Monday the 1st of June.
To donate, go to 3cr.org.au.
3CR, here to stay.